Hello everybody and welcome to the Regional Community Childcare Development Fund supported Positive Behaviour Support in Early Childhood Professional Learning Series. This is Phase 3, Module 3, using highly intensive individual support planning using a prevent, teach, reinforce structure for young children and how this can be used for children at risk of exclusion from the service. This is the third module of Phase 3. We strongly encourage you to utilise the Phase 1 and Phase 2 modules, as well as the first two modules in this phase, in order to give the highest chance of success for this, any strategies you may use from this module. We'd like to start with acknowledgements. We're very grateful for the Centre on the Social and Emotional Foundations for Early Learning and the Centre for Evidence-Based Practices for Young Children with Challenging Behaviour. You can see both of their websites there, for the wonderful resources that they continue to make and share generously to support early childhood educators. We're particularly grateful to the creators of the pyramid model for supporting young children in early childhood learning settings. The creators of the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce for Young Children. You can see in the centre there is a screenshot of the front of their book. I strongly suggest that everybody buy this book because it's a wonderful, wonderful structure and much more comprehensive than what we're able to give you here. And also the Washoe County School District, who generously put their PDFs online for their examples and their teaching of the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce structure to their staff. We've used a number of their screenshots of examples of child behaviour throughout this presentation. So thank you to all of these people for generously sharing the resources that we've included in this presentation. These resources in particular are really fantastic, so we have hyperlinked them individually. At the Challenging Behaviour website, there is a webinar for using pyramid model intensive individualised interventions, which is the first hyperlink. The second hyperlink is about early childhood mental health and how using Prevent, Teach, Reinforce can support children at risk of developing mental health disorders. So both really fantastic resources that we've hyperlinked because we hope they'll be really helpful to you. So I'd like you to press pause for a moment in the video and discuss with the person next to you what brought you here today. What were you hoping to learn from this module about challenging behaviour and about how we support children with challenging behaviour? So press pause on the video now and talk to the person next to you for about 5 minutes. Thank you and welcome back. So before we get into the actual assessment and intervention component, we need to give you some sobering facts about the need for this intervention and why we need to provide this training and support to as many early years educators as possible. The first is that around about 9 to 13% of American kids and adolescents between 9 to 17 have serious emotional or behavioural disorders which result in substantial to extreme impairment. So that's a lot of kids that have a very substantial level of impairment, which means they're not able to go about their daily lives as children. We would imagine that the statistics are very similar for Australian children. Another startling fact is that children who are identified as difficult to manage at ages 3 and 4 have about a 50-50 chance of continuing to have difficulties in adolescence. And absolutely it's the case that those who receive intervention tend to get better. Those who don't receive intervention do not tend to get better. We also know that early appearing aggressive behaviours are the best predictor of juvenile gang membership and violence. So children who have very challenging behaviours when they are young are at risk for some really terrible developmental trajectories unless we get in and support them with evidence-based strategies whilst they're young. The critical importance of intervening while kids are young cannot be overstated. When aggressive and antisocial behaviour keeps going until the child is 9 years old, it is pretty unlikely that we are going to be successful with interventions that start after the child is aged 9. So the earlier, the better. And also, sadly, of the young children who show early signs of challenging behaviour, about 10% of those actually get services to support them with those difficulties. So very few of our young children with problem behaviour get the support that they need. And another fact that is very sobering is that preschool children are 3 times more likely to be expelled or excluded from a childcare service than children in grades K to 12. So that's a very sobering fact that our youngest children are at most risk of exclusion. So the answer is not what do we do. We actually know what to do. There are evidence-based practices that are effective, that have been found to work, that have been found to make kids' lives better. The problem is not what to do, but how we can support kids and how we can help families to access services. So our focus for today is on the what to do, is on being the intervention for young children who come to our early learning services. Rather than waiting for other or external services, what can we do to support young children who have challenging behaviour? Hi, and welcome back to Module 3. We want to have a note on the language that we use around children who have problem behaviours. We're using the language of behaviour error to describe any behaviour which is not the successful behaviour in that circumstance. So for example, running, if you do it outside, that's totally fine, but if you do it inside over the top of the beds while other people are sleeping, that's a behaviour error. A challenging behaviour is behaviour errors which mean people are getting hurt or the child is at risk of exclusion, so they're a higher level of severity. I want you to stop for a minute, press pause on the video, and discuss this question for 3 minutes with the people around you. Behaviour errors get a significant emotional response out of us. We need to be aware of how that can affect our decisions. Some examples of challenging behaviours: physical or verbal aggression, non-compliance or defiance, self-injury, doing things like screaming or stereotypic behaviour, breaking things, or withdrawal from social situations can all be challenging behaviours. Challenging behaviours might result in self-injury, or it might result in other people getting hurt, can result in things in the physical environment getting broken or damaged, but they interfere with learning new skills. And they also cause the child to be really socially isolated. So they cause damage not just in the time when they're occurring, but also in the future development of skills for that child. And serious problem behaviours tend not to get better by themselves. Serious problem behaviours, if not intervened with, progress through a really predictable course of ever-escalating challenging behaviours in many cases. So this is our prevalence pyramid. We want to start our energies on what can we do for all children to help all children be more socially and behaviourally successful. Then we want to add interventions for somewhere between 5 and 15% of children who need a bit of extra support to be successful. What we're focused on today is the 1 to 10% of children who have really persistent challenges who require focused interventions for them to be successful. And we do have the technology. This is a very hopeful and positive place to be coming from. We have evidence-based practices that we know work to help kids be more successful. We know that earlier is better. We know that supporting parents matters because they don't always know what to do to help their child either. We know that high quality early years environments are absolutely key to the success of these interventions. We know that a comprehensive approach where everybody is involved in supporting this child is required, and we know that effective behaviour support does make a difference. Critically, we know that these interventions don't need to be done in a clinic by a specialist, that the people who can make the biggest difference is actually parents and educators who can implement these effective practices in natural settings like childcare, like home, like early years schooling. So we have the power to make these positive changes for our young children. The structure that we will be strongly commending to you, and I say again, I really recommend you buy this book because it's absolutely fantastic, is the Prevent, Teach, Reinforce structure specifically for young children, which is the early childhood model of individualised positive behaviour support. We are at the Tier 3 part of positive behaviour support, so what we do for individual children. For these children, PBS, or positive behaviour support, is a problem-solving approach. So some of the questions we seek to answer is, what is the problem behaviour? Why is it occurring, using a technology called functional assessment of behaviour? And then our focus is on what can we do as the adults to prevent the problem from happening in the first place, to teach the child an alternative behaviour, teach them a different way to get their needs met, and then reinforce the new behaviour so that the child gets their needs met more efficiently. These will be our guiding questions as we go through the rest of the session. So I want you to just pause the video for a minute and reflect on this question with the people around you. Press pause for about 3 minutes. All right. We're going to share with you some belief statements which you may want to write on the first page of your handout. The first belief statement is that all behaviour is the person's best attempt to get their needs met. So all behaviour exists because the person is trying to get their needs met in a way that is effective for them. Might not be terribly effective for us, might not be a very pro-social behaviour, but it's their best go at getting their needs met. Another belief statement about why children make behaviour errors is that they either do it because it's a skill deficit, they don't know what to do or when to do the right behaviour. So this is very common in early childhood. Kids just don't know that when you go into the library you need to use a quiet voice, or kids just don't know that when you're on the veranda you need to walk, but when you're in the playground you're allowed to run. We need to teach them. Or kids don't really understand why they need to do what we're asking them to do. So someone who can see their friends playing on the oval on the other side of the veranda, they might know that they need to walk on the veranda, but oh gee, it just feels a little bit faster if I run. So they need more teaching and reinforcement to understand the importance of doing the behaviours that we ask them to do. Some other assumptions about behaviour is that behaviour has a message often. Behaviour is frequently a form of communication, particularly for people, perhaps people with disability or perhaps young children who don't have the verbal skills to explain their needs to us with words. Often their behaviour will be communicating some sort of a message. Another assumption is that kids often use challenging behaviour when they don't have the social skills or they don't have the communication skills they need to go about getting their needs met a better way. So this is very frequently the case for children who have behaviour that seems a real affront. It's very often they just don't have the skills to do what they should do instead. Okay, so this diagram is the foundation for our understanding about behaviour using a functional behaviour assessment approach. And that is that all behaviour is either to get something or to escape or avoid something. The things that we may be trying to get or avoid might be a stimulation or some sensory sensation, a social something like attention and connection with an adult or with a peer, or access to a preferred tangible or a preferred activity. Technically, the getting something is positive reinforcement, and the getting away from something or the escaping is negative reinforcement. But what's really important for our understanding about behaviour is that we think of all behaviours as being either a get or an avoid behaviour. So I now have a video. I want you to keep that chart in front of you, which is on page 2 of your handout. And I want you to form a hypothesis or a best guess about what is the function of this behaviour. Is it a get behaviour or is it an avoid behaviour? Use this YouTube link to find the video. It's also on your handout. Or if you go into YouTube and search Crying Child Crapville, they're the makers of the video, then it should be the first link that will come up, and it should look like the starting image should look like this image on the screen. So it's an interesting video, that one, and I let it play all the way through. At first it seems a little bit amusing to see the little child trying to use their behaviour to get their needs met. But as you watch the video and it goes on longer and longer, it becomes apparent that the parents might have a functional hypothesis, but perhaps their intervention is not effective. So I'd like you to look at the chart in front of you, and based on the chart in front of you, I want you to make a hypothesis about whether that behaviour of the child that you just observed was a get behaviour or an avoid behaviour, and which of the things off that chart do you think it might be? I'd like you to press pause now and have a 2-minute discussion with the other people in your group. Okay, so hopefully you've had a discussion about that behaviour, and if your assessment was that you think it might be a get behaviour and you think it might be about attention or connection, in this case particularly with adults, I think you're probably correct. The chart that you can see right now is some examples of get behaviours that we each do in each of those different categories. You can see that many things we do are to try and get some internal or sensory stimulation, to get some social connection, which by the way is no bad thing. It's a really deep and fundamental human need to need that connection with others. We often have negative connotations about kids doing things to get attention, but it's as fundamental a need as oxygen is. Or we might do things to get access to a preferred activity or a preferred object. We also do behaviours to try and avoid certain things like sensory stimulation, so we eat to remove a hunger pain. We do things to avoid attention or social interaction or connection at different times. And we do things to avoid doing particular activities we might not want to do or particular objects or things. So we are all informed by get or avoid behaviours at different times. What I want you to do now is consider the behaviour of a particular child that you are working with, and we're going to do the top section of your second page. We're going to get into the activity where we assess your child's behaviour and then consider how we could develop a prevent, teach, reinforce plan to support that child. So what we're going to do is this sequence. We're going to start by describing the behaviour. Then we're going to describe what happens after, or the consequence. Then we're going to describe what happens before, so we're going to bounce around in time a little bit. And then we're going to make a best guess or hypothesis about whether the behaviour is a get behaviour or an avoid behaviour and what we think it might be. We're going to start with the behaviour, so the middle box of the top of your page. We want you to write in here a definition of the behaviour that's so accurate that someone who's never seen it before could act it out accurately based just on the words that you write in that box. So if the kid is doing something like punching other children in the face, then we want to write exactly that, punching other kids in the face. What we don't want to write is words like violent or aggressive or rude, because it's really hard. If I said to you right now, can you please show me what this kid is doing? They are doing rude behaviour. It would be really hard to act that out and get it right based on just the descriptor of rude. We need to be really, really explicit. So here's an example of how you're going to do the behaviour description part of this activity. Just in the behaviour box, I want you to be really explicit about behaviour. So we don't want to write something like child demonstrates aggressive behaviour. That really doesn't help us know exactly what the kid is doing. What we want is a really clear descriptor. The child hits adults with the cricket bat. So I want you to think about your child. If they're doing a number of behaviours, just choose the one that happens most frequently. It is possible to do functional behaviour assessment with multiple behaviours, but it's a lot trickier. So let's just start with one behaviour at the moment. I want you to write a really clear descriptor of what is that B for behaviour, just in the behaviour box on the top page of the third sheet of your handout. So press pause on the video now and spend 5 minutes clearly defining the behaviour. welcome back. Hopefully you have your behaviour definition and they are really clear and explicit examples, like this better example. I'm going to show you a quick example. This is a made-up student called Joel, and I'm very grateful to the Washoe County School District for sharing their Prevent, Teach, Reinforce resources on the internet so that I could use this example. Joel had a whole heap of behaviours that were problems. He was hitting, not following directions, taking toys. They chose just one as their target behaviour, so that was hitting teachers and peers. And how they wrote their behaviour description, they've called it an operational definition, but they've written Joel will hit teacher and peers, usually with an open hand. That is a beautiful, clear description that goes in that B for behaviour box. That really allows us to understand exactly what that kid is doing. If I said to you, could you mime for me that behaviour, you could all do it and get a really accurate example of what that behaviour looks like from the information they've provided. So hopefully your B for behaviour is looking really clear so we can see exactly what the child is doing that's the problem behaviour. It can be useful to get a bit of a guesstimate of how frequently the child is doing the problem behaviour. Is it 7 times a day? Or is it 7 times per hour? Or is it twice per day? Some sort of a rough estimate of how often this is happening, because this will allow us to determine whether our behaviour intervention is successful or not. So that's the B for behaviour. The next thing that we want to write down is the C for consequence. Consequence doesn't mean the punishment that we give on the basis of that behaviour. It means the what happens after that behaviour. What we often miss as adults is the thing that happens right after the behaviour. So we will think, the child has hit someone, for example, and we might think of the consequences being that the educator goes over and talks to that child. However, what we might miss is the thing that happens the very first second after they do that problem behaviour, and then the 5 seconds after that, and then 5 seconds after that. So I want you to consider the consequence sequence of what happens after your child engages in the problem behaviour, and go for the very first second after they've done that problem behaviour, and then what happens, and then what happens, and then what happens. Press pause on the video now and spend 5 minutes with your partner defining what is the consequence, what happens after the problem behaviour. Press pause now. All right, now that you've got your consequence defined and we've made sure we've worked out what happens straight after the behaviour, now we jump around in time and go to the antecedent, which basically means what happens before the behaviour. What I would encourage you to do is to start here. What happens just before the behaviour, in the 5 seconds before the behaviour, or in the 10 seconds before the behaviour? What is going on in the child's life at that time? Is there someone near them, or are they doing a particular activity? What's the thing that happens just before they do the problem behaviour? Once you've defined what happens just before the problem behaviour, then you can go back in time to a little bit earlier. Was there anything that happened a bit earlier that day? Or what particular activity were you doing that made it a bit more likely that that would happen? The just before is really critical, but you can also add some information about anything that you think is important that happened a bit earlier in the day. So I want you to press pause on the video here and spend 5 minutes with your partner discussing what are the antecedent factors, what happens before your child engages in the problem behaviour. Press pause now. All right, hopefully you've got your antecedent factors defined and you've worked in your pairs and you've got used your handout and you've got the behaviour, the consequence and the antecedent across the top of the 3rd page of your handout. What I want you to do in just a moment is share the behaviour sequence that you have with your group. So you're going to read out a sentence that sounds a bit like this: when, and then read the antecedent factor, then the child's name, or you can call them child X if you want to, does the behaviour, so then you read out the behaviour box, and then you read out the consequence box. So I'd like you to press pause on the video now and go around the group that you're with and each share your behaviour sequence with the group. Press pause now. Okay, so sharing this sequence allows us to make the functional hypothesis. So remember Joel, that we had the example of earlier, who was hitting peers and teachers usually with an open hand. This is what the sequence looks like for him. When Joel is asked to participate in the arrival activities, then he'll begin hitting peers or adults. That's the problem behaviour. As a result, he gets reprimands, redirects, and talking about what happened or restating the rules. Their functional hypothesis that they get out of that sequence is that he gets attention. They think it's a get behaviour rather than avoid behaviour, and they think that it might be adult attention in particular that he's getting. So what I want you to do now is make your functional hypothesis. You've got your antecedent behaviour consequence. Use your chart of get and avoid and make a hypothesis or best guess of what you think your child is trying to get or avoid. Try to use the language from the handout. Try to use the language of get or avoid and select either sensory or social or preferred activity or tangible when you're using that language. So we try not to use explanatory fictions. We try to choose from the chart what do we think it is. If you think there are two things, for example, if you think a child is punching other children to avoid social interaction with kids and get to play on the preferred activity of the iPad, so it's avoid peer attention and get preferred activity of iPad, make a bit of a guess about which one you think is the stronger one and put that one first. You can have two, and often they do work together like that, but try to make a bit of a guess based on your knowledge of the child. Which one do you think is the more powerful one for the kid? And you can then write two sentences, two get and avoid sentences. So I'd like you to press pause on the video now and spend about 5 minutes with your partner using your chart, working out what is the get or avoid for this child, what is the function of the behaviour. Okay, once you've done that activity of using the sequence in front of you and developing a best guess about what need the child is trying to get met, you have basically completed a functional behaviour assessment. You have a functional hypothesis about why is this child engaging in this behaviour? What is the need they are trying to meet with their behaviour? The next video will be about what can we do to support that child to get their needs met in a way that works better for them but also for everybody else. So how can we replace the behaviour that still allows them to get their needs met? That's functional behaviour assessment. All behaviour is the person's best attempt to get their needs met. We really need to keep that central in our thinking. So this is where this video is going to end. The next video is going to be on how to teach people a better way to get their needs met in order that everybody can be safe and everybody can be learning.